Good afternoon, and thank you for attending today's Inservice. Today we have the pleasure of having Miss Melanie Griffin, who's here with sexual trauma, and she's about here to explain what her position is, what her role is. So again, ladies and gentlemen, I have Miss Melanie Griffin. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming. Like you said, I'm with Sexual Trauma Services. I'm actually the Sexual Assault Services Coordinator at Sexual Trauma Services, which basically means I'm kind of the catch-all position there. So I do some of the counseling, the legal advocacy. So I've actually been to the office here a couple of times before with clients who are going through the family court system with DSS. We also just finished up Sexual Assault Awareness Month in April, and so we had a lot of events. I don't know if anyone saw. We did a walk a mile in her shoes where we encouraged men to join in the fight against sexual violence, and so we had a lot of law enforcement and things like that wearing high heels around 5 points for a mile. So we had a lot of good press coverage for that, and so those are some of the things that I do, and so I'll go ahead and start with the presentation.
Yeah, it should be your thought it was.
Okay. The mission at Sexual Trauma Services of the Midlands is we support survivors in recovery from trauma associated with sexual assault and abuse, and we educate the community to identify and prevent sexual violence as well. Okay, some of the services that we offer, we have a 24-hour hotline. We have one for Richland and Lexington County as well as for Newberry County. We do serve all three counties. We also provide hospital accompaniment. Now, hospital accompaniment is when a sexual assault is reported to the hospital. When that happens, they call the operator. Operator calls one of our volunteers or staff that's on call, and we respond to the hospital. At the hospital, we explain the kind of process that they're going to be going through at the hospital. This is very helpful for some who have never gone through this sort of situation before. We can explain the kit that's done, the rape kit, which is just kind of collecting all of the forensic evidence throughout the exam. We advocate for them with hospital staff as well as with law enforcement. The hotline and the hospital accompaniment are kind of our first line of defense. We also provide follow-up services. A lot of times people just want a little bit extra information after a hotline or a hospital call, so we just provide them with information. If they want to go a little bit further, we do offer free and confidential counseling to anyone over the age of 12. Unfortunately, we just do not have the capacity at this time to be able to serve children that are under the age of 12, and usually the Assessment Resource Center and the Dickerson Center, I'm sure y'all are familiar with them, they do a lot of the counseling for those that are under the age of 12. We also offer group counseling services. We have a teen support group, which is for ages 12 to 17. We also have a non-offending parent and guardian support group, and we have an adult survivor of childhood sexual abuse support group. And most of these meet every week. We're on a break right now, so they're all getting ready. The sequences are all getting ready to start back up in a couple of weeks. We provide legal advocacy and court accompaniment. If we have a client that's coming into the office and she kind of builds a rapport with us and she would like for us to go with them to court, things like that, we do that for them, just so they'll have that extra support there. Now that can be children. We've been to family court. That can also be adults that may not have anyone else that can provide a support for them. We're also able to accompany them to the solicitor's office if they're going to be meeting with a solicitor and just kind of want someone there to make them feel a little bit more comfortable. We provide community education and awareness. We have a director of education who goes out to a lot of the different high schools in Richland, Lexington, and Newberry counties, as well as some of the middle schools, and they do presentations all over, and their main goal is for prevention, just giving information to adolescents and adults to allow them just to be able to know more about what it is so that they can identify it if it's happening in their own life, as well as if it's happening in others' life. We just recently got a grant from the Stewards of Children where we educate adults on how to identify and prevent sexual violence as well. And this is usually for teachers and for people that work in daycares and usually a lot with small children. We also have volunteer opportunities, and the volunteer opportunities are usually, they can work in the office, but we also provide 25 hours of volunteer training so that they would be able to answer the hotline and also go on hospital calls as well, which is fantastic, as I'm sure that y'all know. It kind of relieves the staff from doing a lot of things that we just unfortunately don't have the time to be able to do. Okay, just kind of a general definition of what actually child sexual abuse is. Child sexual abuse is the exploitation of a child for sexual stimulation of an adult or any significant older person. Now, these things can include a lot of different things. This could be obscene phone calls. It could be exposure of genitals or breast. I think about 6 months ago, there was a man who had been cited, I believe, twice in one of the high schools in the Midlands area who had been flashing people. And so sometimes children and even adolescents are very scarred by this. And so this is also something that we provide counseling for. Showing a child pornographic materials, fondling, masturbation in front of a child, oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse or attempts, and the exploitation of children through prostitution and or the production of pornography. And we see most of these things in our office through some of our children that we respond to the hospital. And usually it seems how it happens. A lot of times it'll start out kind of with the first things, showing a child pornographic materials or exposure to genital breasts, and then it kind of escalates into the attempts of rape or, the act of rape itself. Okay, just a quote from Davis and Bass. This is from the book Courage to Heal. Child sexual abuse is a violation of power perpetrated by a person with more power over someone who is more vulnerable. This violation takes a sexual form, but it involves more than sex. It involves a breach of trust, a breaking of boundaries, and a profound violation of the survivor's sense of self. The most important thing in defining sexual abuse is the experience of the child. It takes very little for a child's world to be devastated. A single experience can have a profound impact on a child's life. Okay, just a couple of the statistics from the study which Darkness Delight had performed. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused before they turn 18 years old. This is a very, very high number, which is why our agency also provides the prevention piece and the education piece as well. Hoping to one day decrease that number so it's not as high. 1 in 5 children are solicited sexually while on the internet. 30 to 40% of victims are abused by a family member. Another 50% are abused by someone outside of the family whom they know and trust. So around 80% is actually the amount of victims of sexual abuse that are abused by someone that they know. And so it's not always just it's a stranger in the dark alley or it's someone out in the parking lot, but it's much more times someone that you know. So we have a lot of incidents of adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse when they were abused, say, by some sort of family member, a father, an uncle, a mother, as well as brothers and sisters. I mean, it's such a wide scope. And I actually have some handouts for y'all as well that I'll kind of give y'all at the end, and it just kind of describes a lot of those things and things y'all can kind of take home with you and look over. A couple more facts. More than 1/3 of reports are children 5 years or younger. Age 6 is the average age of onset with an average duration of 1 to 4 years for abuse to continue. Molesters usually appear normal in most ways. There's no stereotype for someone who is a perpetrator for sexual abuse, unfortunately. And so, we have so many people that come in the office, they're just like, I never thought that this person would have done this to me. But that's the thing, there's no rule way for us to be able to know because there's no stereotype for it. They don't wear t-shirts that say, hi, I'm a rapist on it. There's things like that. And so it's very hard because it's such a betrayal of trust. Sexual abuse is never the fault or responsibility of the child, just something for us to remember. Children may not tell because of fear or violence to themselves or someone that they love. And that just kind of goes along with the manipulation piece of the sexual assault for children, okay, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about. And if y'all have any questions at any point during this presentation, please don't hesitate to ask me, okay? Grooming, okay. Now, grooming is pretty much the concept of building that trust with a child so that the child's sexual abuse is actually possible. And it usually starts out small with engaging in non-sexual hugging and touching, just so you're able to build that trust with them so you can make them know that, or let them think that you're a very safe person for them to be around, as well as letting their parents know, if it's not a parental figure, that you're safe to be around with them. Okay, introduction to different forms of sexual touching, kind of making it normal for them, making them think that, this isn't something that's bad, or this isn't something that you feel like you should need to tell your parents. It's usually accomplished very slowly in order to desensitize the child, okay? And there's always the manipulation of the child to try to keep it secret, okay? Which is why it's so important just for parents and, for grandparents and things like that, just to have those conversations with children, just as far as, secrets are never a good idea, you know, when you're that young, and just kind of talking to them about it. The child is confused, frightened, and powerless, and feels that he or she has no alternative but to accept the abuse. Okay, and that's just going to kind of come in with the manipulation part. And these are just the 6 different ways that an abuser or perpetrator would be able to manipulate the child. Okay, the first one is bribery. Well, I'll let you watch TV really extra late, you know, if you know, we can do this, or I'll take you for ice cream later tonight, or whatever it may be that's going to be attractive to that child. You know, we've had many cases where, say it was a very small child, say 3 or 4 years old, and she was lured in by a lollipop or a popsicle or something like that. And so it's very difficult because children are generally trusting, and it's very hard for them to think, oh, well, you know, you're offering me something that's great, you know, it must be okay. There's also threat of harm to the child. Well, if you tell, then I'm going to make sure that you pay for it somehow, or, you know, I'm going to spank you if you tell, or I'm going to hurt you if you tell. And so making the child think that it's something that they're doing wrong. There's also the threat of harm to the offender. Well, if you tell someone, then I'll probably have to go to jail. Or if you tell someone, you know, in the extreme case, if you tell someone, then I'm going to hurt myself, or, you know, I'm going to kill myself. Things that a lot of times small children just don't really understand, and they don't want anything bad to happen. There's also the withdrawal of affection, and with that could come, well, if you tell someone I'm not going to love you anymore, or if you tell someone I'm not going to spend time with you anymore, or I'm not going to take you to school anymore, or I'm not going to, you know, play catch with you outside in the yard anymore. There's also the manipulation part of breaking up of the family. If you tell someone, then I'm going to have to leave. Or if you tell someone your mom's really going to be mad at you and she's probably going to make you leave. And so just all of those threats of, well, the breakup of our family is not going to be the same if you tell someone. And so it just kind of keeps going back to that fact of, this is why you need to keep it a secret. This is why you don't need to tell anyone. I had a lady come to the office. She's seen me now, actually, and she was sexually assaulted by her father about 40 years ago, and she's never talked about it until right now. And so just imagine it just kind of impacted that secret that she felt like she had to keep, that's had on her all her entire life. And she had completely repressed most of those memories, and so it's just like, for the past 5 years, they just kept coming back and kept coming back, and she's remembering all those things that she, at that time, wasn't able to cope with and wasn't able to deal with. Another one is just taking advantage of a child's innocence. You know, like, no, this is just kind of going back to just normalization of the sexual abuse. Well, you know, this is something that's normal. This is something that all kids do. Or there's nothing wrong with this. You know, it shouldn't make you uncomfortable because this is natural. And so just making it normal for them, which is very sad. Okay. Now, some of the indicators of child sexual abuse. And so say if, you know, y'all are with one of your clients or something, and say they may be in a foster placement or something, and they kind of start acting a little bit differently. You're kind of curious, well, I kind of wonder what's going on with them. They're not sharing anything with me, but I wonder if something deeper is going on, or if something else happened along with the physical abuse that maybe they didn't share with me. These are just some of the indicators of child sexual abuse that y'all can just kind of be on the lookout for. Extreme moodiness, and this could, extreme moodiness could also just be kind of mood changes, you know, where they used to be maybe a very outgoing child and a very positive child. All of a sudden, you know, they start being very withdrawn, and they're very scared in public places, or they're scared of being around crowds, or scared around certain people. Changes in sleep patterns, and this could be they used to sleep, you know, like a rock from 8 p.m. to 7 a.m. in the morning. Now, all of a sudden, they're not able to sleep. They're having nightmares. You can hear them, you know, yelling in their bedrooms and things like that. And so if they look really, really tired to you, you know, just kind of inquiring about that. Well, you know, you look kind of tired. What's going on? You know, why are you so tired? A change in appetite. This can go either way. We have some who overeat extremely, and they just kind of binge eat from time to time, and a lot actually. Or we have ones that don't eat at all, that just completely lose their appetite. The thought of food or looking at food just physically makes them nauseous, and they're just unable to do that just because of the stress. And, you know, and part of that too is just kind of the guilt that they feel because of that. Comments that they may make, and these comments could be comments that are sexually inappropriate, or comments just kind of how they do feel scared, or, well, I really don't want to go back to that house. Well, why don't you want to go back there? You know, just kind of asking the right questions. Okay, some more indicators of childhood sexual abuse would be if they're complaining of pain or irritation in the genital area. This is something that we usually see in children pretty much about 6 and below. Above, they kind of know what's going on. Even at 5 or 6, you know, you're a little bit more aware of what's going on. But I mean, if they're keeping that secret and not telling you, you know, and if you're noticing a lot of pain or irritation in that genital area, or even if they're having problems going to the bathroom, things like that. Bedwetting can be very normal, and this can be, you know, up to adolescent. If they're being sexually abused, a lot of times what they will do is repress to a younger stage in their life. And so they may start acting like they're 4 or 5 again, or 3 years old again, and wetting their bed. Difficulty with urination or frequent urinary tract infections. We see that a lot at the hospital if it's younger children, and you know, parents or guardians or whoever it may be may bring a child in just because they've had 2 or 3 urinary tract infections in the past 2 months, and there's just a lot of pain or irritation down there, and they're worried that something might be going on. And sometimes there is something going on, and sometimes there's not. Aggressive or seductive behavior with classmates, teachers, or other adults. And this can kind of go back to some of the inappropriate sexual comments that we had talked about a little bit earlier, as well as being very aggressive towards people, being, you know, displaying some violent behaviors, or displaying very sexually aggressive behaviors as well. You know, approaching someone in their class and you know, trying to pull their pants down, or trying to fondle them, or things like that, or even doing that to their teachers. You know, if it's an adult that's abusing them, they think that that's something that's normal, and so they're just unaware that this is something that's not normal behavior. Sexual provocative behavior and/or knowledge before an appropriate age. That knowledge before an appropriate age, you know, can be some of those sexually inappropriate comments, or just kind of knowing, you know, if they're 2 years old and their parents haven't taught them what the appropriate names are, you know, for their sexual organs, things like that, and they know that information. Or, you know, if they start talking about sex, or if they start talking about different types of sex, things like that, things that, you know, say a 3-year-old would have no knowledge of whatsoever. And so it's going to be a little suspicious if they start saying things like that, and, you know, those are things that they shouldn't know. Self-destructive behavior, such as alcohol or drug use, running away, or causing intentional physical harm to self. We see a lot of alcohol and drug use in survivors of childhood sexual assault, and with that, you know, it also comes alcohol and drug use later in life as well. But if you see someone and they kind of start trying to escape that way by using the drugs or the alcohol way before, you know, time that's normal to kind of start trying those things out, that can be a flag. Running away. And as far as the causing intentional physical harm to self, a lot of times what that's going to be, is, for females especially, is going to be the cutting. You know, the cutting of their arms, you know, just kind of the scratching and things like that. A lot of times they'll do it on their inner thighs. There's different places kind of from most, but those are the 2 most common places that the females will cut. Yes, sir?
Do you have a correlation between children assaulting other children? Like maybe a 14-year-old child and a younger child, or maybe a child 16 years old, or a child in the preteens, whatever. Mm-hmm. Are those numbers coming to you, to your knowledge?
We do have some of those, yes, sir. Some of the younger children say, you know, if you're under the, like if you're in the home and you're under the age of, I want to say it's 8 or 9, y'all may actually know this number, but usually DSS will not investigate those cases. Right. If it's within them. Are y'all aware of what age that is?
Well, for one, we understand that those activities are called assaults,
mm-hmm.
and DSS does not get involved in assault cases.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying from a sexual trauma perspective,
mm-hmm.
those children are still victims. Would your office handle those type of situations?
Absolutely, yeah. We would, if they're over the age of 12.
Okay.
We would be able to offer them services as far as the counseling and things goes. But yeah, absolutely. I know for a fact that we've seen probably in the last 6 months or so, a couple of clients in our office that were actually sexually abused by a sibling, and you know, and it wasn't investigated. Well, it was reported, but you know, DSS decided not to investigate, and so did law enforcement, just because of the ages of the children. But we do that, and we also provide referrals for. If we're called, providing referrals for children who need kind of an evaluation. You know, if they're displaying and showing a lot of that really inappropriate behavior, and they're fondling and they're doing these things to these other children, we do make referrals for that. We don't specifically work with offenders, but we will make referrals for that. And we get, referrals even for adults that are sexual offenders. And so we have, referral lists and things like that for that, because, these people still need help, but unfortunately, just due to our grants and things, we aren't able to serve any sort of offenders or anything. But yes, we do provide referrals and things for that. And as far as, I know we kind of talked about the females with the physical harm, as far as the males go, this is usually a lot more just kind of the risky behavior, doing things that are dangerous. Say if it's trying to do some sort of stunt down the stairs, or driving your four-wheeler really, really fast and seeing if you can brake before you hit the tree, things like that. Just doing things that are risky, basically. Okay, some of the possible long-term effects of childhood sexual abuse. I know we had kind of already discussed the alcohol and drug abuse. Hypersensitivity is one, as well as hypervigilance. With the hypervigilance, it's just kind of fearful of being in certain areas. You're kind of always on your watch. Say, if it was a stranger attack, you're always kind of fearful of being in any sort of situation where you don't feel comfortable, where you don't see an exit, or where you don't have someone in the room with you. Learning to trust self and others. This is a big one, especially learning to be able to trust others. All of our survivors of sexual abuse have a lot of difficulty with intimacy and with trusting others, and this includes family members, relationships that they have, friendships, it might be any of those things. Feelings of low self-esteem. We do a lot of self-esteem building and counseling. Just because their self-esteem has just been so degraded and degraded and degraded with child sexual abuse, just because they're taught that this is something that's normal, or this is something that you should be embarrassed about, or this is something that, well, if you weren't so pretty, then this wouldn't happen to you, or if you weren't so handsome, that maybe that person never would have done it. Feelings of panic, rage, and depression. Depression is a huge one. Sexual abuse and depression, there's a very high correlation for that. With the rages, most of the time that's just going to be a lot of unexpressed anger that they have towards the assailant, or towards another family member who may not have known about it, so wasn't able to protect them, or someone that was supposed to be in that protective role may have known about it and didn't protect them, which we see a lot of. Sense of powerlessness and lack of control. A lot of times they have comfort in chaos, and so they're more comfortable when they're in a crisis situation, or they're more comfortable when a lot of things are going on. It's just like there may be some drug abuse in the house, or they may be addicted to such and such, but it's just they feel more comfortable in that because they're not having to deal with their own feelings and what had happened with them. Difficulty in developing, maintaining close personal relationships. We just talked about that. There's numbing that's involved, and that's going to go along kind of with the addiction piece, just because they're not wanting to cope with things. They don't want to know about things. A lot of times when those memories kind of start coming back, if it's from child sexual abuse, they don't want to deal with them, and so they just try to numb it out and they're like, I must be crazy or something, or maybe these are just some sort of dreams or something that I'm having. These things can't be real. Difficulty in identifying, acknowledging, and disclosing feelings, especially unresolved feelings of anger, guilt, and depression. People that have been sexually abused struggle with these so much because it's very hard for them a lot of times to accept the anger that they feel, and to accept the fact that they are depressed. They know that they are depressed, but they're unsure of exactly why it is that they're depressed. And a lot of times it comes from all those unresolved feelings. There's a learned helplessness and dependency. A lot of times survivors of childhood sexual assault struggle a lot with codependency. They have one person that they can talk to, and they kind of rely on that one person for everything. Lack of expertise in basic social skills. A lot of survivors of childhood sexual assault feel like they were robbed of their childhood, and a lot of times they're not able to have normal relationships growing up, and so they don't have anything to model that after. And they, and if it was a family member, or if it was a close friend, or say someone that your mom worked with, they're seeing these adults and they're seeing the fact, well, that wasn't healthy. It's just like, but they see that as healthy, and so they're just unsure of how to act in social situations because they're so used to keeping all of those secrets. They're so used to not being themselves, or being afraid to be themselves. There's also a strong desire to live in isolation or to hide out from life. They've seen kind of what part of the world has to offer, and they're just really not interested in that anymore. And they've seen that people that were supposed to protect them, and people that they were close to hurt them time and time again. I know we talked about usually the age of childhood sexual abuse starts at age 6, and then it usually lasts for about 3 or 4 years. And so they've had this big chunk of their childhood where they've been hurt. Okay. The long-term effects are going to be more severe when the incidents are more frequent. And so say if you were sexually abused from the age of 6 to 12, that's a lot more intense than someone who was sexually abused, who may have been sexually abused once when they were 6. Not to say that it's any less, but a lot of times the coping and the healing process is just going to be a little bit more difficult for someone who was assaulted again and again and again, if it occurs over a long period of time. The different sexual activities are wide-ranging and extensive. I mean, the things that, some of these perpetrators make the children do are just completely unheard of, and this could be, I know we talked about exposing them to pornographic material, or, it could also be getting them to perform in a pornographic material sort of film, filming some different sorts of things and then selling those to people and putting this on the internet and things like that. And so it can be very, very expensive. Effects are also more severe when there's more than one perpetrator. So we've got a client coming to the office right now, and she's an adult survivor of incest. And she had about 5 family members in her family that did this to her repeatedly when she was younger. And so her healing process has been very slow, and it's been very difficult for her. Also more severe if it involves physical violation and force. If you have that physical assault with, the beating up and things like that, a lot of times it can be more severe than just the sexual abuse. Again, not to say that any abuse is worse than the other. A lot of times it has to do with the healing process. If the abuser is older, if the relationship to the perpetrator is close, again, it just kind of goes back to that whole betrayal of trust aspect. Someone that you thought that you could trust, and then unfortunately you weren't able to do so. Experiencing both sexual and physical abuse. The child's personality, if they're a very shy child to begin with and then they start being abused, a lot of times they'll either start, there's one or two ways. A lot of times they'll either start sexually acting out and physically acting out a lot, or they'll just withdraw further into their shell. And it's very difficult for someone to be able to reach them. Also, what's very big is the parental reaction to the disclosure. This could also be a guardian reaction. It could be, anyone who, the first person that they tell, whatever their reaction is going to be, is really going to gauge if they feel like they can tell someone else, or, it's just like, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't have told. Maybe this was something I should have kept secret. And so just trying to make sure that you are responding in a positive way to them, letting them know that you are someone that they can trust, and you're someone that does care for them and wants to protect them. Okay, to the healing process. Things that are important for survivors of childhood sexual abuse is just accepting that abuse has happened. It's a lot easier for people to be able to deny that something like that had ever happened. However, as far as the healing process goes, until they're able to actually accept it, then they're unable to move on. I mean, it's like any sort of thing, with Alcohol Anonymous and, Narcotics Anonymous, things like that. The first usual step is accepting the fact that you have a problem. And in this case, it's not accepting that you have a problem, just accepting that the abuse has happened. Processing the emotional response to the abuse, how you felt, whether that was guilty or you were blaming yourself or, blaming your other family members, whatever those feelings were, just being able to process those. Recognizing the effects of the abuse on present behaviors. I know we talked about it's very difficult for people sometimes to engage in normal relationships after the abuse has happened, just because they haven't had anything to echo that. They haven't had anything to mirror since the fact that they were, since when they were younger. There's the grieving process. Cognitive reframing, which is just kind of bringing the truth and letting them know, that this wasn't anything that you had done wrong. This is not your fault. This is not something that you should feel ashamed about, because this isn't something that was your fault. Especially if it's, an assailant that's much older than them. Learning new ways to relate to people and respond to situations. This is just kind of healthy relationships. And self-determination. Then knowing the fact, that this is something that I want to work on actively. This is something that I want to be able to move past. I know this is always going to be a part of me, but just realizing that I can have normal, healthy relationships, and striving for that. Okay. If a child discloses sexual abuse, staying calm, praise the child for actually telling you, because that is a huge secret for them, and for being able to trust someone with that information is really, really hard. Believe the child. Even if it sounds really far-fetched, just go ahead and just believe them. That's going to mean so much more to them. And the actual rate of someone lying about actually being sexually abused is incredibly low. I think it's between 0 and 4%. And this is for children and adults. And so, I mean, it's a very, very low percent of people actually not telling the truth about this. Tell the child that the abuse is not his or her fault. Get help for the child, and this could, the first thing that you want to do is getting the child medical help, making sure that the child is going to be okay. This could be, you know, a lot of times it could be just a visual exam if the child is very small, or it could be the full rape kit, you know, if the assault had just happened and there was penetration, going ahead and getting that evidence just so that when it goes to trial, you'll have that information that the law enforcement, the solicitor's office will be able to use. The second thing you would want to do is get help with law enforcement or with DSS, you know, regardless of which one it would be, to see what kind of needs to be done on their part, you know, if the child needs to be EPC'd, or you know, if the child needs to be placed, you know, somewhere else or something like that, just to make sure that that child is safe. That should be kind of the first priority. And then counseling, like I said, the Assessment Resource Center and the Dickerson Center, I'm sure you'll work with them, provide counseling to a lot of the children that are ages 12 and above. They provide the forensic interviews, which they would provide to law enforcement or DSS, and it just kind of gives them a better idea of exactly what had happened so that they would be able to use it in court. Don't blame the child. Don't question the child extensively. Allow your child to talk if he or she desires. Keep the routines normal. I think a lot of times what happens, you know, if a child discloses to their mother, you know, well, my next door neighbor, you know, the next door neighbor who lives 3 houses down did such and such, and then if the parent, you know, out of wanting to protect the child and everything, completely changes everything that they do, completely changes their schedule, things like that. A lot of times it's harder for the children because then they think, well, I shouldn't have told because now I can't do anything that I was used to able to do, things that were positive in my life and things that I enjoyed doing. And allowing you to talk to the child's siblings, if it's a parent or something, you know, just kind of letting them know kind of what's going on, if it's appropriate. Okay. And this is our office number. We're open from 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, and our hotline number, which I told you is 24 hours a day. So even if y'all ever had any sort of questions about something or just need a little bit of extra information, you know, Saturday at 3 a.m. in the morning, we always have people that answer the telephone. So if y'all ever need anything, please don't hesitate to give us a call. Our services are free of charge and completely confidential. Okay. Does anyone have any questions? I'm sorry, I talk very fast, and so I go a little bit quicker.
I have one concern.
Yeah.
These children who are victims themselves, we all understand that most pedophiles were once themselves victims. If gone untreated and say they never disclosed anything, and they became a pedophile themselves, what recourse for that person to have? Because actually, they are a victim themselves who are also victimizing others.
Exactly. And unfortunately, there's not really very much protection for that. You know, if they are, you know, perpetrating and they are committing these crimes against children, unfortunately, that's going to be the biggest issue.
And think of some of these perpetrators are also children themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
That bully's 14, 15, 16-year-old bully who was himself a victim himself earlier.
Yeah.
Who's now being perpetrated on by other children.
And so, you know, unfortunately, those things, it's more the crime that they're actually committing is what's going to be taken into account. Thankfully, they will sometimes take into consideration the fact that, oh, you know, I was a victim of sexual abuse as well, you know, and they may get a lighter sentence, or the judge may order the fact that they get counseling, you know, maybe while they're in prison or something like that. And so they have been known to do things like that. But yeah, it's very sad. And that's why we strongly suggest that, you know, whenever someone is sexually assaulted or abused, you know, that they are getting help as soon as possible, just so that they're able to kind of process that and kind of be able to talk about it and realize that it is something that happens to a lot of children and to a lot of adults, and it's not something that that you should be ashamed of, and it's not something that's your fault. And so I think, you know, with the child sexual abuse, a lot of times when it's done over and over, as when they're children, like we were talking about, it just makes it very normal for them. And so they may see something wrong with it later in life, but then it's just like, well, this is what was done, this is what was done to me, why not do it to someone else, unfortunately. So.
Is there still kind of a dual standard or double standard in society where that 14-year-old female student who's perpetrated on by her male teacher is held in the same standard as that female teacher who's having activities with a 14-year-old male student? I'm hearing more and more about teachers, female teachers involved with male, it's almost as if I can't say the punishment or the crime whatever, but it's not the same as it is when that male teacher victimizes that female student.
I'm not sure exactly kind of what sentences they're getting, but I know, where was it? It was up near the Greenwood area, I believe. There was a female, I think she was a cheerleading coach, and she had, where was it?
Somewhere in that area.
Yeah, was it somewhere in that area? And she had perpetrated, I think, against a couple of male students, and I know that she had gone to prison. I didn't really follow the trial or anything, kind of what sort of sentence that she had gotten, but I mean, I think there is definitely, some sort of a double standard.
With you saying that with the teachers issue, do you have a lot of victims that's coming that are same-sex victims?
We have had a couple that are same-sex victims. We actually just responded, since I've been there about 2 years, and we actually just responded to our first transgender phone call, our hospital call. And so, that's really interesting. We are actually trying to, our agency with SC Pride and one other agency are actually trying to come up with a LGBT group for same-sex survivors of sexual abuse. We have had a couple, but usually it's opposite. It's, so.
There are probably more cases of this than people realize.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I was a teacher for 43 years, and you can't imagine how much of that.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, it depends on the culture the person comes from as to how they regard it. Well, something harmless, well, that's life, so what? But this one case, when you said some were homosexual, this one boy wasn't interested in that. He was about maybe 13.
Yeah.
And so he wouldn't go along with it, and the man killed a lot of people in the child's family.
Wow.
Cut the child up.
Ooh.
Yeah, that was in Newark, New Jersey.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, it's just like, it happens so much more than we think. Like, before I had started working at the agency, I had no idea that these things happen so much. I think in 2009 alone, I think we served about 1,400 survivors, maybe a little bit more. And so these are all people, that were serving on the hotline or in the hospital or in our office for counseling. And so, it's a huge number. It really is. We have about 300 hospital calls that we respond to every year. And so, and these are all, very acute cases. It had to have happened, say within the past 5 days for them to be able to go to the hospital.
Educating the community to me is a big thing.
Yeah, it's
because in the case of some things that happen, sometimes these are children acting out because of something they've seen or something they've experienced, and you turn on the child and you berate him, and ridicule him, and punish him, and all that kind of stuff, instead of trying to get help.
Yeah, exactly.
And a lot of times, I remember this one case, this little girl, they must have thought she was prosecuted